The ones that have any chance of changing hands left are Brecon and Brigg, the two seats the Conservatives, I think, have some real chance of winning. And then we're also waiting for Berwick and Inverness and Skipton.
Inverness has been held by Russell Johnson.
Russell Johnson's held Inverness.
Yes.
Well, then Berwick and Orkney and Shetland, the two Liberal seats we're waiting for, and also Skipton, which conceivably Labour might win. And Perth and East Perthshire, we're waiting, where presumably the Scottish Nationalists are likely to lose to the Conservatives.
Thank you, David. Sir Keith is obliged to you. And may I first start, Sir Keith, by saying I understand you have severe toothache and severe catarrh, and it's very kind of you to be here at all.
But there are compensations.
May I put to you a statement made by a very senior industrialist, Sir Barry Heath, head of GKN, that his first advice to the incoming Tory government would be, don't rush ahead with any legislation to curb or restrict union power. Wait and see if you can do what you want by persuasion first, if possible.
We intend to have discussions before we embark upon legislation, certainly.
That, if I may say so, is a less than full reply to my question, or rather to Sir Barry's advice.
Yes. Well, Sir Barry is very entitled to give advice. He's a man of great experience, but our presumption is that the law has been relaxed by the outgoing Labour government in favour of trade unions and against the rights of the citizens as a whole. And we think that some movement in the other direction would be sensible. If during our consultations we are convinced that there is no need for legislation, then we shall learn that lesson.
Do you regard a majority of around 40, if that is the eventual figure, as being one which justifies a Conservative government without any doubt in proceeding to implement its mandate?
Oh yes, there's been no fudging of the mandate. We have made our intentions clear. And in fact, there can be no government in this country elected to office without the votes of millions of members of trade unions.
And do you welcome an assurance given this morning on this programme here in conversation with me by both David Basnett and Mr. Tom Jackson, the chairman of the TUC, that the trade union movement would not seek by use of their industrial power for political reasons to obstruct or sabotage the Conservative elected government?
I welcome it, but not in the sense that it surprises me. I would have expected no less from them in any way.
Would you think that they have the power, sufficient control over their more militant members to ensure that that assurance is honoured?
Well, we've seen in the recent winter trade union leaders losing control of some of their members, and some of their members being joined by militants who possibly were not even members of trade unions or of the unions concerned. And that is why, to go back to your earlier question, it may well be in the interest of all to consider changing the law in the three particular specific ways that we have openly and constantly repeated that we intend to do.
You're referring to picketing, close shop and strike ballots?
No, not strike ballots, which cannot be the subject of legislation in the same way, but benefits for strikers' families.
Oh, I see, yes. Can I ask you to comment on a statement made a few moments ago by Mr. Roy Hattersley, who's still sitting here beside you, that the Conservatives won in spite of Margaret Thatcher and not because of her?
Oh, I think that's less than generous of Roy Hattersley. Margaret Thatcher has presented the policy, she has presided over the formulation of the policies, she has set her stamp upon the policies, she has presented the policies time and time again. Our victory has flowed from Margaret Thatcher's courage, patriotism, and clarity of speaking. Now, I think Roy is being less than generous.
Well, I understand why Sir Keith says I'm being less than generous. It's in the position of he would say that, wouldn't he? But I wonder if he thinks I'm being less than accurate. You remember we had a wrangle about what polls said what a moment ago, and I put the point to you that every reputable major poll had the Prime Minister getting more popular over the last 3 weeks and Mrs. Thatcher comparatively getting less popular. And those polls have turned out to be remarkably accurate in terms of predicting the result. I wonder why Sir Keith thinks that those polls got the overall result right, but were wrong about the public's estimation of Mrs. Thatcher.
I think it's ungenerous of Roy Hattersley because it is Mrs. Thatcher who has, as I say, approved the policies, formed the policies with her colleagues, taken responsibility for the policies, and it is the policies that the public has approved. Mrs. Thatcher has all the while said that she doesn't think this country goes in for presidential elections, and Roy Hattersley is proving the case that in fact the country has chosen not in a presidential way, but on the choice of policies offered by the two main parties.
Roy, can I ask you this? Yes. Don't you give Mrs. Thatcher praise not simply for winning an election, which I wouldn't expect you to warm to, but the fact that she has won it as the first woman ever to do so, and that is a considerable achievement?
Well, I do have a sneaking pleasure that a woman has achieved this high office, and I think it's a great day for the equality of the sexes, something which I very much believe.
Will you accept that as a bit of generosity from Mr.
Well, no, it's not generosity, it's accuracy.
I don't think it's very particularly generous. This is an occasion when I hope we can both be fairly magnanimous about things. I don't think Mrs. Thatcher would herself wish to be praised simply on the grounds that she's a woman. It is that she has collected together colleagues and policies which the country has overwhelmingly
Nonetheless, we had an American journalist here today saying the whole of America would be tremendously excited at the fact that a woman has won, but simply because this is a tremendous...
Yes, but Robin, the real question is not this one. I think we're all pleased that this statement has been made of the British people's attitude towards sexual equality. I agree with Sir Keith that that's, in a sense, when I say it's trivial, I mean it's a subsidiary issue. But the real issue, which historians and political scientists are going to argue about, is whether the Conservative Party has won this election because of what it proposed, or whether it's won this election because of people's concern about the problems of the winter, about the need for a change for change's sake. You'll recall, before Sir Keith arrived, I told you, and I think I was being as frank as any politician can be at this moment, that the winter, what the winter conjured up in people's minds, the simple desire for a change is what won the election. And that's not something positive that Mrs. Thatcher created.
But the desire for a change is one of the most positive things you can have.
Well, no, I think it's one of the most negative things you can have. But my simple point is, the Conservative Party would certainly...
But if you don't like your wife and you want to marry another one, that's a very positive decision.
Well, if you want to marry somebody else, that's a positive decision. If you want to marry anybody else to get away from your wife, that's a very negative decision.
Sir Keith, briefly, what post do you expect in a Thatcher administration, and what post would you prefer?
You would be amazed if I answered either. It is for Mrs. Thatcher to decide that sort of thing.
Anyway, in spite of your catarrh, in spite of your toothache...
It's not a bad day.
I made you smile.
That's right. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Keith. David?
Standing in the doorway down there of the Conservative Central Office, puffing away at a cigar, on the left there, with the spectacles on, is Gordon Rees, the Director of Communications of the Tory Party, the man who produced Mrs. Thatcher, whose advice, well, she said on television that he took her advice, but a lot of people think that actually she took his very careful advice. He was a television producer. He's standing there on the left in the blue suit with the blue tie and the blue shirt, like Mrs. Thatcher, dressed entirely in blue today. Cheerful figure of Gordon Rees, delighted at the outcome of this campaign. And I have news of Mrs. Thatcher's first appointment. And I don't expect Sir Keith Joseph to prick his ears up at it, because it's the appointment, her first one, of her press secretary, who's to be Henry James, a 60-year-old who's been a number 10 Downing Street spokesman 3 times, to Sir Alec Douglas-Hume, to Mr. Harold Wilson, and to Mr. Edward Heath. Well, we have news, and perhaps I should have come to that first, because politically it is more significant than Mrs. Thatcher's press secretary, but since we had Gordon Rees in the shot, I thought we might just as well identify him, that Jerry Fitt has held Belfast West with his biggest ever majority.
That's a very striking result, because the Republican vote was thought to be being very badly split in Belfast West. We haven't yet got the figures, but it was thought that he was in some serious trouble, and that he's actually, not only that he holds it, but he gets an increased majority, is very impressive. One doesn't quite know what has happened within Belfast in terms of the division of the vote and the movement of population during the last few years of the Troubles, but I am interested and slightly surprised at the increase in majority, not at Jerry Fitt holding it.
Well, we'll have that first Irish result in. I think it is the first Irish result, isn't it,
that Inverness was held by Russell Johnson?
Yes, yes, I mentioned that. Here are the figures for Belfast West, and we might see the Russell Johnson figures later on from Inverness. So Belfast has been held with a majority of 8,000. It's up from 5,500. Increase of 12%.
And Jerry Fitt has almost got No, his vote hasn't gone up. I think his vote is only up from 49% to 49.5%. He has got almost half the vote there, and the various Republicans, the Republican clubs, or rather more closely sympathetic to the more extreme people in Northern Ireland, only get 7% of the vote.
The Unionist vote has split there between the official Unionists and the Democratic Unionist Party follows Ian Paisley.
But
that vote has split 8,000 and 3,000 on the Unionists. It wouldn't have been enough to unseat Jerry Fitt. He was one of the most prominent MPs. He voted always with the Labour Party in the last Parliament until the very last moment, when on the vote of confidence he abstained on the grounds that he was very angry over the way that the RUC were alleged to be interrogating prisoners and over the extra seats that were given to Northern Ireland by the Labour Party. We've got a second recount at Brigg and Scunthorpe. I didn't know we had a first.
Well, I didn't hear that. No, that's very interesting. It's one of the two seats that we think the Conservatives might still win from Labour, the results still to come. I must say that it's very interesting to think whether we'd be sitting here at this moment if Jerry Fitt had voted differently on March the 28th. His vote was the one that made the difference. I suspect we'd have had a dual election, not local government and Westminster on May the 3rd, but Westminster and European elections on June the 7th, if Jerry Fitt had done a different thing on March the 28th.
Well, let's find out now how things are going on at the home for another hour or two of the Prime Minister, James Callaghan. Michael Cocker is down there in the street just outside. Michael?
Well, a number of flowers have been arriving here, and I can just see down the street a whole contingent of policemen have also been arriving here. The flowers have been arriving here for Mrs. Thatcher. They've been blue flowers. The men in blue, I'm not sure whom they're arriving here for, but it looks very much as if Mr. Callaghan, who I understand has had his lunch, is going to be leaving very soon. And what we understand that he will do, he will go to tender his resignation to the palace, and then he will take the privilege that's allowed to outgoing Prime Ministers and spend the weekend at Chequers. We understand he'll go to Transport House and then he'll go on to Chequers.
Oh, well, Michael, sorry, I missed, you said he was going to stay the weekend there. You haven't seen any sign of him at the moment? He's just inside there.
There's been no sign of him since he came here. He got in at 7 o'clock this morning. As you know, I talked to him at 5 o'clock in the morning. I asked him if he had any advice for Mrs. Thatcher. He said if I were her, I'd go to bed. And he has said nothing since then. He himself went to bed at 7 o'clock in the morning when he got down in record time from Cardiff down to here, but then as a Prime Minister, of course, you're allowed to, with a police convoy, go quite fast.
In other general elections, we've seen removal vans already in Downing Street at this stage of the day, and furniture and files and crates of drink and all kinds of things being moved out and in, and people sneaking in by back doors and all the rest of it. That's not happening today.
Well, I talked to Mr. Callaghan about that some years ago, and he thought that it was very undignified, and he is determined to preserve his dignity. And I think that the furniture vans, when they come, will come in a discreet way, but not today. There's no sign of them either at the front or the back of Downing Street.
I can't remember which the election was when everybody's furniture was unloaded in full sight of the television cameras. But
exactly, it was 1970. 1970, when the John Lewis furniture van came and took all of Mr. Wilson's furniture away, and that was what made me think that, in a sense, the John Lewis furniture van was the British democratic symbol of the tanks in the street in totalitarian countries.
Right. Well, we'll be back to you soon, Mike. Anyway, it's just after 1 o'clock, and let's just have a look at the state of the parties now. 553 results in. 286. It's tantalizingly slow, this climb up to 318, which we know Mrs. Thatcher will reach at some point, just coming up just after 1 o'clock. I think Big Ben is letting us down. Our Big Ben is letting us down by about a minute or two, according to my computer. Anyway, the prediction is going to be a 339 Conservative. That's slightly up on our previous prediction, isn't it?
And if no further seats change hands, she would get 334. There are 5 seats. She should gain 5 seats to fulfill our prediction. Can I make one point of the 10 Downing Street thing? It is important to realise it's not just the courtesies about moving out of somebody's house, but 10 Downing Street is the office of the Prime Minister. And if Mrs Thatcher's got to go through the business of forming a government, she needs Sir John Hunt and all the office staff of number 10 at her disposal. So Mr Callan has, as it were, to make room in the public offices for the new Prime Minister to move in without any of the problems about moving house. But the actual furniture around the main offices has got to be at the disposal of whoever is Prime Minister of Great Britain.
We should just check exactly what majority over all the other parties we're saying that Mrs Thatcher is going to have at 339. It's 40... What's it gone up to?
That goes to 43. That goes to 43.
Yes. So a 43 majority. Now, we saw David Steele a moment ago talking to Philip Tibbenham, and he was said earlier to be close to tears at the news that John Pardoe was not going to be returned to Parliament. He said it was a terrible blow for him. So let's have a look at how the Liberals have fared with their 3,633,073 votes counted so far. Bob.
Well, they went into the election with 14 seats, and they're going to come out of it with either 10 or 11. We must assume that Orkney and Shetland will be held by Joe Grimmond. They've lost the 3 seats to the Conservatives, a staggering result in Montgomery, which has been held by the Liberals since 1885. Devon North, perhaps not so surprising. Cornwall North, a very remarkable overthrow of John Pardoe, who probably got as much publicity in many ways during the election on television and everything else as any other figure of any party except party leaders. And that was, I think, a great surprise, though there was the problem. You couldn't squeeze any more Labour votes in any tricky voting down there. But the narrowest held one of all we haven't yet heard from, but it is interesting that remarkable things were happening. In Truro, for example, a great leap into 8,000 majority, which is a very narrowly held one, so anything can happen. But it'll be 10 or 11 seats in return for the vote they got. Now let's just remind ourselves of the picture since the war facing the Liberals. We've leapt through the years and seen what happened. 9% of the vote got them 12 seats in 1945. Way down, but 6 seats. Then you see they leapt up by February and October 74 to 18% of the vote, which was half as many votes as either Labour or Conservative, half as many votes as Labour or Conservative, but a derisory figure of 14 and 13 seats. Now this time it looks like 13% of the vote, third best record since the war, and certainly the third best since 1929, and again they'll have 10 or 11 seats when the day is over. This, of course, is what really annoys them. Here are the figures for the last election. They won't be very different this time. Labour got 1 MP for every 38,000 votes. The Conservatives 1 MP in that last time for every 36,000 votes. The Liberals got 1 MP for 411,000 votes. I'm working it out now. It looks like this time they'll get 1 MP for every 450,000 votes they get at the election. The figure will be a bit higher here in this election, but we haven't got the final figures yet. But that is the irony of the situation and the source of that rather heartbroken interview, I think, in which David Steele said, what could he do but fight on against this sort of odds? Back now to David.
We had news of Inverness being held by Russell Johnson, but we haven't had the full figures on that, so I'm putting a slight question mark over that news until we do get the full figures. Financial Times index is down 2.7. It was down, I think, 4.4 earlier. We've got a shot at the Financial Times index there. And I think Colin Chapman is there and can tell us what's gone on during the day on the news of a Tory victory. Colin?
Yes, well, as you said, the index is down 2.7, but a new index is due any moment now, and we don't know what that's going to be. It's been a dramatic morning because right at the start, prices were marked up by a few pennies, and then there was the news from EMI, a big electrical company, that they were in trouble with their music industry, and brokers marked down prices, and the index went down 4 points. And then later the news of the victory cheered up people again, and so it moved up slightly. Now with me is Nicholas Goodison, the chairman of the Stock Exchange. What does the city really feel about the results so far, discounting that EMI story?
Well, I think they must be pleased, Colin, because in the last few years the economic problems have been considerable, and really nothing's been done about it yet. And you take inflation, industrial output, new investment in industry and employment. We've done worse than all our major competitors. At the same time, our national debt, the money the governments borrow, has doubled in the last 5 years. And this has forced interest rates up so high that companies can't really afford to borrow long-term money. These things have got to be put right. We've got to have industry put first. If we don't, the country's not going to succeed and we won't get the social services we all need.
Well, what's going to be the advice from the city, from the stock exchange, to the new Thatcher government?
Well, I think they must tackle this enormous borrowing requirement. The government can't go on borrowing at this rate. We really can't afford to have interest rates as high as they are. They must do something about taxation, and I don't only mean tax at the top rates, because that is where the incentive must come. I mean tax at the bottom end as well, because the poverty trap is a disgrace. Our whole tax system is much too complicated. It's got to have a new look, that tax system, so that people want to try harder, want to succeed, because, as I said, we do want industry and commerce to succeed, on which we all depend for our living in this country.
Now, the new Chancellor is going to have a budget within a matter of weeks. He wouldn't be able to change the tax system in a matter of weeks.
No, he's got a difficult job on his hands because, well, first of all, they've all been saying because they haven't seen the books, and you can't see the books thoroughly in 3 weeks. But I'm sure he'll do something about some tax rates, but I'd have thought it'd be a modest start. I think what will matter most is an expression of intention as to what they're going to do once they've taken a close look at the situation.
Would you expect to see any kind of changes in a budget this summer?
I would expect to see some modest tax cuts of some sort, but I really can't forecast the detail because I'm not the Chancellor. But I'm sure it will come.
Now, people sitting at home watching this might think it rather strange that the city, which on the whole supports a Conservative government, has marked down shares this morning. Why really is that?
Well, the share market, of course, has been rising now for some months because people have been hoping for a better economic performance on the back of newly found wealth in the North Sea, that's the oil. And they've been hoping that a new government would pin more on investment in industry, on increasing employment by encouraging industries to put up new capital plant, than on encouraging the consumer. And this has all had an effect on confidence, and that's what matters. That's what makes people invest their money in risk capital of industry, confidence. And I think that the change of government will give them a bit more confidence that industrial policies will come first.
Talking of industrial policies, do you share Sir Barry Heath's view expressed earlier as advice to the government that they should go slowly in dealing with the unions in putting forward any new legislation?
Oh, yes. And I'm sure that they'll get cooperation on that front. I don't believe that it's a British habit not to cooperate with the government with a good majority that actually has been elected by the people.
Now back to the election studio, and David Dimbleby from me, Colin Chapman, at the Stock Exchange.
Well, it's curious that the stock market was showing, according to the Financial Times, in the anticipation of a Tory victory, increase in the share prices of the service industries, but not of manufacturing industry, which is at the heart of Britain's prosperity. It wasn't showing much of an increase there. It's rather distinguishing between the two. Now, we've heard that at 2:30, the Prime Minister will leave Downing Street to go to Buckingham Palace for an audience with the Queen. At 2:30, the Prime Minister will go to the Palace. We've also had the result from Inverness. The Liberals did hold on to Inverness, Russell Johnson, the MP there, and the SNP went third of the poll. The Conservatives rose to second. Quite an interesting result. We might just see how the percentage change in Inverness. This is the largest constituency in Britain. We can't apparently show that just for the moment. Russell Johnson, who has been rushing between Europe and his constituency, is the only British Liberal MP in the European Parliament and is standing in the direct elections. Now, we have the percentage change, and I think David Butler wants to make a point about
this. Well, the striking thing about this is that it isn't really much, as far as I can see, tactical voting. Probably some SNP Liberals went to Conservative and some SNP voters went to the Liberals. But essentially this is still a four-way marginal in which the SNP and the Labour Party each get over 20% of the vote. One other thing about Inverness, Russell Johnson is going for a dual mandate and trying to run for Europe too. And this must give him some hope of running, unless people dislike the idea of a dual mandate in the Highlands of Scotland.
Before we leave, can we just have that graphic back again? And David, can I just ask you to explain more simply to me what you were saying about it being a four-way marginal? Well, I mean, the SNP vote has dropped by 9% there, and what you're saying is it's been reallocated to the Labour Party, to the Conservatives and to the Liberals.
What I'm saying is that there are four parties, all with over 20% of the vote, and the winner only got 33%. So in the next election, every party could go in feeling they're in with a chance. At the most, there would need to be a 6.5% swing from the Liberals to them to get them back. So it's still the most sort of open four-way thing, and I think that's the lowest percentage of the poll that any victor has got in any election we've reported on. Of the 557 we have reported on since midnight last night.
Now we've got how many more Liberal seats to come? I think it's 2, isn't it?
We've got Brecon and, we've got Berwick and Orkney.
Let's just see the seats that the Liberals so far have held. The 9 seats they've held, that's David Alton's seat, the top one, Liverpool Edge Hill, which they took only 9 days before Parliament was dissolved. And those are the seats they've held, and these are the ones that they've lost. Just have those in a moment. To the Conservatives, Jeremy Thorpe's seat, Devon North, and John Pardew's seat in Cornwall North, and Montgomery, which they lost to Labour.
No, the Conservatives.
To the Conservatives, sorry. To the Conservatives. Computer's right. Good. 291, and it's got to go to 318. And we've got a result in from Belfast North. The Paisleyite unionist, the Democratic unionist, John McQuaid, has won the seat in Belfast North from the official unionist candidate. The official unionist was Cecil Walker, and the Democratic unionist, John McQuaid, who was a former Stormont MP. It was a wide-open contest, this, in an area where there have been many killings in the 74-75 period. We've just had the result in from Henley, there you see, Michael Heseltine, that is, and on a swing of 6.7 from the Liberals, he holds his seat in Henley. So the Belfast North result we'll give in full in a moment.
But it is unexpected. It wasn't one of the 4 that Billy Flax or anybody else was suggesting was really one of the likely changes. We've now had 2 results from Northern Ireland. Joey Fitt did unexpectedly well in Belfast West, and the official unionists did unexpectedly badly in Belfast North.
John Biffin there, close advisor of Mrs. Thatcher, who briefly had shadow office and gave it up because it was too great a strain, is safely back, and it's thought that he may be offered a job by Mrs. Thatcher in a new government.
And there was a flash then that Belfast South was held by an official unionist, so it's not that the Paisleyites are sweeping across Belfast or anything.
So Mrs. Thatcher now needs 27 more seats to get to that 318, still at 291. Maybe Mr. Callaghan has timed his journey to the palace exactly right to coincide with hitting that.
We'll have an hour to prepare, I think. It's only 1:15 now, and I think 27 seats will come in the next 3/4 of an hour, if I guess from past experience.
We hear that the Liberals have held on to Berwick. Alan Beath, the Liberal Chief Whip, has held on to Berwick. Well, that leaves only one more to go.
And that will go to... Joe Gorman must, I think, hold on to Orkney. It's astonishing. After all, Alan Beath was in the most marginal seat, only a majority of 70 last time, and there was quite a large Liberal vote to be squeezed. On the other hand, he's had a recount every one of his 3 elections. I shall like to see whether he's had a recount this time.
Well, it's just after 1:15. As always, we will be keeping an eye on everything, and we'll interrupt even Angela if we find we have something to tell you from Downing Street or from the Conservative Central Office. In the meantime, Angela, take it away.
Well, still 75 results to come in, but indeed the voters have made their choice. Mrs. Thatcher and not Mr. Callaghan will lead Britain into the 80s. The Conservatives are well on their way to a comfortable majority, and Mrs. Thatcher is on the threshold of becoming Britain's first woman Prime Minister. It now remains for Mr. Callaghan to concede Labour's defeat. He'll see the Queen and offer his government's resignation at around 2:30 this afternoon. Well, Mrs. Thatcher, on her day of triumph, must now expect the call to form the next government. Apparently, she doesn't intend to move to Downing Street until tomorrow at the earliest. In the meantime, the Tory leader, showing little sign of tiredness from a night without sleep, has been celebrating her victory with party workers at the Conservative headquarters. She told them it really has been great fun, every single thing we asked for. Well, another of Mrs. Thatcher's key men is in again with a comfortably increased majority. James Pryor, the Tories' employment spokesman, produced a 4% Tory swing at Lowestoft to celebrate 20 years as MP for the town. Well, for the Liberals, there have been two crushing defeats and an astonishing victory in the last hour and a half. The county of Cornwall provided two remarkable contrasts. At North Cornwall, the party's deputy leader, John Pardoe, lost his seat to an 8.6% Tory swing. David Steele was close to tears when he described Mr. Pardoe's defeat as a shattering blow. But in the Cornish town of Truro, David Penhaligon produced a 6% Liberal swing to add more than 8,000 to his majority, leaving Labour with a lost deposit. But there was another defeat for the Liberals when Emlyn Hewson went out at Montgomery. A 10% Tory swing took the seat from the Liberals for the first time since 1885. And for the Attorney General in Mr. Callaghan's government, Mr. Sam Silken, an 8.3% swing to Conservatives almost unseated him at Dulwich. Mr. Silkin's majority slumped from nearly 7,500 to just 122. And the Conservative man who pushed him hard was Mr. Eric Morley, chairman of Mecca, until his dismissal, which was accompanied, if you remember, by a £200,000 compensation. Perhaps that's one of those results that we should have given, as Mr. Morley himself would have said, in the time-honoured reverse order. Well, for several of the biggest names in the Labour Party, the swing to Conservative struck home even in the safest of seats. Mr. Tony Benn, Energy Secretary until yesterday, was not exempt. His majority of over 9,000 at Bristol South East was cut to just under 2,000, a swing to Conservative of over 7%.
Well, what I see happening is this. I see policies now likely to be implemented by what seems to be a new government that would desperately damage the interests of working people and their families. And although the outcome of the election has been evidently a change of government, the work of the Labour movement and the work of the Labour Party and the work of the trade unions is to defend the interests of our people. And when I say our people, I mean the people who create the wealth. And I shall certainly work very hard, and the Labour Party itself will have to learn lessons from all this, and will have to strengthen its base, and of course in time we shall come back into government, and we now have to get on with the job of work that we have to do in opposition.
And finally, the night has produced the occasional odd story, which, unless you're really a committed viewer, you might just have missed. This was one of the ones that I liked. The people of Preston North have a new MP this morning, but they won't have any trouble remembering his name. Mr. R. Atkins, Labour, has been replaced by Mr. R. Atkins, Conservatives. No relation, by the way. Mr. Atkins beat Mr. Atkins by just 29 votes. Well, it's a day of blue skies for some, clouds for the others, but to see what it's really like today, I think let's join Jack Scott, I think it is, to look at the weather. Is he there?
Well, Mr. Scott has given up the weather for today. Perhaps he's been giving us too much weather for the last couple of days. He was there a moment ago. He was there at breakfast time.
Leave the studio.
Where's the stamina in the man? Well, you all come back and join us here, and we have a remarkable Liberal result that in a way rather matches what David Penhaligon managed in Truro, and that is that Alan Beath, the Liberal Party Chief Whip, has held on to Berwick on Tweed with a greatly increased majority. His majority up 15%, a swing from Conservatives to Liberal of 7.9%, a really remarkable result. His vote goes from 14,500 up to 19,000. The Conservative vote drops a little bit, and the Labour vote is down from 4.5 to 2. So that's some consolation for David Steele that his Chief Whip has got back in there.
It's one of the 3 or 4 most remarkable results of the whole election. I think Anglesey, the Conservative gain there in Clavering Hugh's seat, was the most remarkable. But then we had David Penhaligon's in Truro, and this one, where my old pupil Alan Beath has, after winning a seat, you can see the change, up by 11%. I think almost all the experts thought that Berwick-on-Tweed was the Liberal seat most certain to be lost. He had majorities of 30 and 70 and 300 odd in his previous 3 elections. Now he's got a majority which, if this had been reflected in the other key seats that David Steele was after, the picture would have been a very different one.
The Berwick-on-Tweed seat used to be a safe Conservative seat, and it was the seat held by Lord Lambton until his resignation in 1973. It was taken then by Alan Beath, and he's held it ever since and is now doing it with a thumping majority.
But it was also the seat briefly held by Sir William Beveridge at the end of the war as a Liberal.
We have the result from Belfast North. Belfast North is again for the Democratic Unionist Party, for the Ian Paisley Party, as we said a moment ago, John McQuaid. Look how close that result is. The official Unionist candidate, Cecil Walker, who was in first place, that party was in first place, goes into second place, 995 votes between them. The SDLP in third place, 7,823.
There's something very remarkable about that result. The winner only got 27% of the vote, and that is the lowest percentage of the vote by a victorious parliamentary candidate, I think, since Portsmouth Central in 1923. It really is a very odd thing to win a seat with only just over a quarter of the total vote.
Unionist Party of Northern Ireland came fourth, and the SDLP, the Alliance Party, came fifth, and the others, I don't know how many others there were. There were several more candidates, I think, in that constituency.
6 candidates in all.
Six
They are
all.
all, I think, on... Oh, well, they're not on the display screen, I'm sorry.
So that's Belfast North. Mrs. Thatcher is at 291, with a handful more seats to come in to reach that 318. The share of the vote nationally now is beginning to show the kind of pattern it will settle down for. The interesting thing here is that the Conservatives at 44%, that's not as much as Mr. Heath got of the popular vote in 1970, but the Liberal vote is way up from what it was then, which is accounts for it. And the Labour Party at 38%, if you exclude the elections of 1974, it's the lowest Labour vote, popular vote, since the war. And this is how the percentage has changed. Conservatives have gone up 8, Labour gone down 2, the Liberals down 5%, and that's the percentage change, and that's not going to shift much more with 72 results or so to come in. And that might be an appropriate moment for us all to go our own separate ways.
Well, one of the most striking features of the 1979 general election campaign has been the difference in voting patterns between the North and the South. Certainly London and the South East gave the emphatic endorsement to Mrs. Thatcher and her policies with a 6.6% swing, almost half as much again as the national average. In London, Labour have so far held 42 seats, losing 6 overall, while the Conservatives have held 47, picking up those 6 Labour losses in the process. And if we look to see the votes cast, we can see that the Conservatives have 46%, way ahead of Labour, with just 40%, and the Liberals well behind with about 12%. And that means that compared with the last general election, a huge increase in the Tory vote at the expense of their Labour rivals, and even more at the expense of the Liberals. Well, it was a bad night even for well-established Labour candidates. Former Arts Minister Hugh Jenkins lost at Putney, while in Paddington, London, Labour Party chairman Arthur Latham lost his seat by 106 after several recounts. The Conservative gains so far are at Putney, Hornchurch, Fulham, Ilford South, Ealing North and Enfield North. Elsewhere in the South East, traditionally a Conservative stronghold even in bad times for the Tories, Labour lost even more seats. They've held just 3 so far, with no less than 10 overall losses, while the Conservatives have held 62 and picked up all 10 of Labour's losses. And the voting figures are even more spectacular than in London, giving the Conservatives a massive 55%. Labour polled just half that, and the Liberals got around 17%, which was better than their national average. And the change in the share of the votes shows just how big the Tory swing has been, with 9% more votes, partly won from Labour, but many also from the Liberals, who must be bitterly disappointed. Well, the list of Conservative gains shows just how efficiently the Tory machine has cleaned up almost all the Labour seats in the South East. The Conservatives have won at Dartford, Luton, Rochester, Oxford, Basildon, Welland and Hatfield, Hemel Hempstead, Watford and Gravesend. Well, one group who've done spectacularly badly in this election is the National Front, with a mere 2% of the vote in London. Their poor showing is all the more significant since they'd made their most determined bid for the mass support which has so far eluded them. A bid which has brought violence to the streets of London. To many voters, the National Front are not a serious political party. Their openly racialist views and extreme totalitarian policies failed to get them enough votes to save even one deposit in the last general election in October 1974. This time they had 3 times as many candidates in London and the South East, contesting nearly all the capital's constituencies. And their campaign was marked by ugly scenes, as their meetings in immigrant areas provoked mass opposition, both by local people and by militants from outside, from the left-wing anti-Nazi League. Opposition which led to the tragic events at the Southall riots. Well, the results insofar show that the National Front has failed to hold its vote even in its traditional strongholds. Its vote in Hackney South and Shoreditch slumped by nearly 600, despite the fact that it was the seat where they did best in October 74, and the Front's candidate was its chairman, John Tyndall. While over in Bethnal Green, the Front's national activist organiser, Martin Webster, was doing just as badly in another seat where the Front must have had hopes of coming somewhere near saving their deposit. Well, the National Front seem right on schedule to lose every single deposit, which will set them back around £45,000, more than a third of that in the South East alone.
Well, with me, Dr. Husbands, who's engaged in the most important study of the National Front yet undertaken in the academic community. Dr. Husbands, what do you think really accounts for this astonishingly bad performance?
Well, I think there are several factors that I'd like to mention. First of all, I think one has to bear in mind that the Conservatives have undoubtedly been quite successful in co-opting the race issue and attracting to themselves the sort of people who might at one time have voted for the National Front. But I think one should also take into account the success of the anti-National Front activities over the past several years now. I think they've got the message across that a vote for the National Front is something rather more than a mere protest vote, in the way that at one point people might have voted for the Liberal Party. But I think on a more general level, one also has to mention the difficulty that any new party faces in getting into an ongoing political system. And I think if we were in a country such as Holland or Italy with proportional representation, we might be talking about a rather different set of results than those that are confronting us now.
Do you think they're virtually defunct now, the National Front?
No, I think that would be too sanguine a prognostication. I think what's going to happen, and the historical experience of continental Europe will bear this out, what's going to happen is that they're going to change the nature of their activities away from an electoral arena. They're going to increasingly concentrate in localized areas where, despite the results that we've seen last night and this morning, they still have substantial amounts of support. And I think that will be the pattern of the future, entrenchment in their strongholds in the old East End.
Dr. Husbands, thank you very much.
Well, the general election result should at least put an end to the feud that's been going on for the last 2 years between the Tory GLC bosses at County Hall and the Labour government. A feud which some feel has damaged projects which are vital to the capital's future. Since the Tories took over the GLC, they've been in conflict with the Labour government in virtually every issue in London politics. Just before the election, the government put a stop to one of the Conservatives' most cherished schemes, the sale of the century of council houses. And the Labour government wouldn't help pay for developing further the Jubilee line, which opened this week. And on London's most intractable problem, bringing prosperity back to Dockland, the Tories at County Hall and the Labour government just couldn't agree on how best to deal with the area, which some say holds the key to London's future.
Horace Cutler, leader of the GLC, Tory-dominated. Just what difference do you see it making to London? Now there will be both a national government that's Conservative and a London government.
Quite a bit of difference. First of all, let me say I'm very happy about the particularly good swing in London. It's really an endorsement of the policies we've been pursuing rather vigorously. Secondly, of course, it won't be a new dialogue that opens between myself and central government. It's a dialogue been going on for 3 years at least. So I expect a more happy time and understanding and sympathetic consideration of the matters which we think are important to London and the prosperity of the people.
Could you name a couple of examples of things that will change in your view now?
Yes, I think we shall get far more understanding about the whole of our policies in the regeneration, the roads and the tube lines, There are a lot of decisions to be made which will affect London. For instance, a third airport that will have to be made in the next couple of years, a channel link, I hope, and perhaps support for the Olympic Games in 1988. I see all these things. I see a wonderful decade for London, given sympathetic understanding from the government who understand the problems. But mostly, perhaps, I would want a review of all the constraints which are put upon London. London is still losing jobs and industry and commerce. I want to see a reversal of that.
But isn't a Conservative government that's committed to free enterprise less likely to be interested in seeing that things come back into London?
All right, that may be true. I hope the Conservative government will be able to differentiate between spending money and investing money. All I want to do is to be able to get on with London's job. Let me get on with it, and I'll do the job.
In just
Give
a
me
word,
the tools, and I'll finish the work.
In one word, can we now expect the Olympics in London in the foreseeable future?
Well, we've got a feasibility study coming out in the autumn, and you will have to judge by that. It's a very intense study. I hope we can.
Mr. Cutler, thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's a rather pertinent point to finish on, because finally we were going to say on a more pleasant note, we have a tale of election athleticism. Peter Walker, who was the Labour candidate in the Tory marginal of Brentford and Isleworth, was said to be the fittest candidate in the general election. Certainly he spent a good deal of the campaign running around his constituency in a breathless search for votes. Well, sadly, it was all in vain. Mr. Walker's opponent increased his majority from 230 to just under 5,000. David.
Well, very briefly, David, we were hearing from Horace Cutler there. You had a point about what London's going to face. You have to make it swiftly because the rest of the world is about to rejoin us.
There's just quite a chance that the Tories will lose control of the Metropolitan Authorities Association, with which the Secretary of State for the Environment has to deal with the 36 largest authorities in the 6 metropolitan areas.
I mean, Labour, in effect, has been doing better at the local election because it had done so badly before, is what it amounts to.
Yes, and therefore there may be a conflict between central and local government, slightly intensified.
Good. Well, we have 69 results to come in, and Mrs. Thatcher stands at 294, Labour at 255. Welcome back again. Welcome back to London. The sun shining outside the Conservative Party's headquarters in Smith Square. There's quite a large crowd there, waiting for Mrs. Thatcher to come out. Well, I can see them. I'm sorry you can't. We now need 24 more seats for an overall majority. Down there in Smith Square, there's a great crowd gathered. The police are there, waiting. Ah, it's better. We can see it ourselves. And Mrs. Thatcher is expected to go to Buckingham Palace soon after Mr. Callaghan goes there. Mr. Callaghan has announced that he won't be going back to Downing Street after he's been to the palace to 10 days' resignation. He'll go to his Sussex farm for the weekend, stopping on the way to thank his colleagues in Transport House on the other side of Smith Square. And Mrs. Thatcher, who's in there, will then go to the palace, and what she'll do after that we don't know. Whether she'll go straight into Downing Street. David Butler was pointing out that in Downing Street are the people, the equipment and the expertise for her to start forming her cabinet, forming her government, I should say, or whether in fact she'll go back home and take the Prime Minister's advice that we heard earlier in the night to go and have a good sleep. So 294, and fairly soon I should think we'll be up at 318. We've got a gain from Brigg and Scunthorpe, and a gain from the Tory gain in Perthshire and East Perthshire. Let's just see both those. One was from the SNP. This is the Conservative gain in Brigg and Scunthorpe. It's been a Labour seat since 1935. This time there was a swing to the Conservatives of 5.6%. John Ellis, the MP, is out, and Michael Brown has been a parliamentary research assistant to Nicholas Winterton, is in. And now Perth, gain from the SNP. We'll have a look at a moment in how the SNP have done as a result of this. Douglas Crawford was the SNP MP at the last election on the right wing of the party, a spokesman for the party on finance and industry and arts. And the Conservative candidate who's won, William Walker, had the disadvantage, you may have seen pictures of him in the press, of campaigning from his wheelchair because he'd had an accident. He's a gliding instructor, runs a gliding school.
Yes.
But he had an accident and hurt his spine, and he fought nevertheless his campaign. And this is Angus North and Mearns, has been held by the Conservatives with a majority of 10,900, Alec Buchanan Smith, who resigned as an opposition spokesman on Scotland because he was pro-devolution and didn't feel the Tory party was sufficiently pro it. He's held his majority and he's got a huge swing from the SNP of 12.5%. There it is.
There it is.
14% the Conservatives, 11% down the SNP.
A great irony that the man who replaced him as Shadow Secretary for Scotland, Teddy Taylor, is the only Conservative who has lost his seat to a Labour candidate in the whole election.
So the pro-devolution man increases his majority and the anti-devolution man has his cut.
Well, they're very different parts of the world. The Scottish Nationalists, in fact, have held up much better. They held up remarkably well there, outside the industrial belt. They've been unlucky. They've lost by relatively narrow margins in all the 6 or 7 seats they held in the northeast of Scotland, in the Grampian area.
Well, we better just have a look, because we now have all the SNP results in, the 11 seats that they had in the old House. They've lost 9 of them and they've kept 2. To Labour, they lost the top 2 there, and to the Conservatives, those seats and another couple. Another 1.
2.
No, I was right. Another couple. We haven't yet had the result from Orkney, talking of Scotland, Joe Grimmon's seat, which is a small constituency. I think his vote was about 12,000 at the last
election. You've got a 39% majority. It would be very remarkable that change, though of course the seat has changed very much with North Sea Oil and the landing of oil there, and but I don't think many of the workers there probably are on the Orkney register.
I don't know whether they read The Spectator, where he was so rude about the British electorate. Perhaps that will have affected it, where he said that it was a terrible mistake to think they wanted to hear any truths, and it was not true that there was a deep vein of democratic wisdom in the British people. On the contrary, they seem to be bamboozled at every turn. All words to that effect. Roughly that. And we've got a recount in Belfast East.
Well, that was a very interesting, very many way
Bill Craig's seat, the official Unionist Party in Belfast East.
Oliver Napier, the Alliance Party, was thought possibly to have a chance. This vote was split many ways on, if we see the figures there.
But, well, we'll get that in a moment. While we're waiting for that result to come in, we'll go over to Robin Day's corner.
And I have with me John Cole, Deputy Editor of The Observer, a newspaper which advised the nation on balance to vote Labour. John, why do you think the nation rejected your advice?
Well, I think the principal reason for the Conservative victory was the number of strikes we had during the past winter. But clearly the public were fed up with this and wanted a government that they felt could do something about it. And Mrs. Thatcher was offering to do that. Now, I have some doubt as to whether she will have such immediate success, but one must wish her well in her efforts in this area.
Let us come to the new cabinet, which Mrs. Thatcher will be forming after the Queen has appointed her Prime Minister. She won't, of course, invite her to form a government. She will appoint her Prime Minister, which is a slightly different constitutional position. Who do you see as Foreign Secretary?
Well, it's the most interesting post, really, that remains unfilled. Either Francis Pym or Lord Carrington, I think, are the front runners for it. But there is always, of course, what to do with Mr. Heath.
Could I come to Mr. Heath in just a moment? But which of those two, Lord Carrington or Francis Pym?
I think with the Rhodesian situation as it is, she needs a Foreign Secretary in the House of Commons, and therefore, in spite of Lord Carrington's experience, I suspect she will prefer Mr. Pym.
And Chancellor of the Exchequer, Geoffrey Howe?
Geoffrey Howe, who was under fire some months ago, but now has played such a leading part in her campaign.
And Home Secretary Willie Whitelaw?
I assume that Willie Whitelaw will carry on as shadow.
Employment, Jim Pryor?
Yes. Who is absolutely crucial to Mrs. Thatcher's plans of trying to get on with the trade unions.
And what about Leader of the House, which of course is not a department, but which is held by somebody who is often the anchorman of a government in Parliament?
Yes, well, Norman St. John Stevens has been shadowing in this post very successfully since Francis Pym gave it up, and I would like to see him continuing in that. I think he's a subtle handler of the House of Commons and might do rather well in it.
Is he sufficiently experienced and of sufficient stature?
Well,
witty, brilliant and talented, yes.
He is all that. He is all that, and I think he has a good feel for politics. And this isn't such an enormous majority that she wants to be offending the House of Commons.
And Northern Ireland?
Well, this is the most difficult post of all. I floated the idea quite a long time ago that it might be her solution to the Ted Heath problem. Now, I don't think she will do it.
Would it be the solution to the Northern Ireland problem, which is marginally more important?
Well, if you think there is an easy solution to the Northern Ireland problem, Robin, and if I knew a man that I thought could do it, I would mention him to you. I think it's a long slog in Northern Ireland, and it wants a man of courage and judgment, and I think Ted Heath is both of those.
One objection to that possible theory about Mr. Heath being offered the Secretary of Stateship of Northern Ireland, which is presumably an offer which no patriotic Tory could refuse.
Yes, that's the argument of why he would do it. The other argument...
Yes, just let me put this to you, though, if I may. Mr. Heath was, of course, the Tory Prime Minister who abolished the Unionists' beloved Parliament and imposed the hated direct rule on the Unionists. Now, and who was regarded as having smashed the Unionist Party, or rather divided it and shattered it. Would that therefore make him the best man to get a good solution?
Robin, you're not going to get a minister in Mrs. Thatcher's government or any other who is acceptable to all my fellow countrymen. Now, Mr. Heath, I think, has got experience of the situation there. He has got both courage and judgment. I think he would do the job well. The doubt that is in one's mind, of course, whether he could be offered a post that is traditionally regarded as rather junior.
What about something to do with Europe for Mr. Heath?
That is the alternative. It would be to carve off a part of the Foreign Office and give him a special staff with breadth of responsibility for relations with Europe. It does make him an overlord of a number of other ministers, does it not? Like trade, like agriculture, and so on. And I would have thought that Mrs. Thatcher, in view of past relationships between the two, might be a bit reluctant to have him so near the centre of her government. That's the argument against being Foreign Secretary as
Professor
well.
Professor Mackenzie, who of course are very learned about our Constitution, he has been arguing during the night and today that Mr. Heath couldn't be Foreign Secretary because the Foreign Secretary always, he says, though this is not quite true, goes with the Prime Minister on major meetings abroad, and Mr. Heath would overshadow Mrs. Thatcher.
Well, I think there are problems in the relationship between the two because of the fact that he has been Prime Minister. There's also the central problem that every Foreign Secretary is expected to take a part in the major decisions of the government domestic as well. Even such a junior person as David Owen was in the Labour Party hierarchy, immediately he became Foreign Secretary, started talking on the economy and wages and so on. Mr. Heath would feel obliged to do the same.
And what about Secretary of State for Scotland, now that Teddy Taylor has fallen down in Glasgow Cathcart?
Well, this is very interesting. Teddy Taylor did badly. Alec Buchanan-Smith did exceptionally well for a Scottish Tory. Scotland is the one area which has been a disappointment to the Conservatives. I think if Mrs. Thatcher has as much sense as I hope she has, that she will detect a worry about Scotland and devolution, that she will not be happy to have a Secretary of State who is not going to do something about devolution. I hope she'll take these inter-party talks very seriously. Alec Buchanan-Smith, I would have thought, was the proper solution in spite of all that has gone before between the two of them.
And can I ask you about other offices? Do you see Lord Hailsham on the Woolsack?
I think it's quite possible for a time, in spite of his age. The big problem, of course, is what to do with Sir Keith Joseph, another very close associate of
You've anticipated my next question.
Sorry.
Not fit.
Whether Mrs. Thatcher will risk having him at industry, I'm not sure. I personally would like to see Sir Keith at one of the spending departments. Social services, again, in spite of all the criticism that has been made of him, he both has this desire to cut out waste and public expenditure. I think he is also a compassionate man, and I don't think in the end he will do anything silly about expenditure.
Could he be Leader of the House?
I don't think he has the subtlety of touch that makes that a problem.
What about education? Are we going to see a Minister of Education who is a Rhodes Boyson, or one of the, as he said, more moderate Tories on education?
Well, Mrs. Thatcher's appointment of Mark Carlyle, who was in the modelling tradition of conservatism, was an interesting one to the shadow education post. She may go for that, or she might think of someone like John Nott, who I think is a very able minister, and since he's not going to get the Chancellorship if Geoffrey Howe gets it, some quite demanding department is needed for him. He's one of the Tories' best debaters and a good administrator.
How do you see the development of the Parliamentary Labour Party now? Do you see this as, from how you've been able to react to the result, I know you haven't been able to study all of them in detail yet, but do you see it as a more left-wing party or a more moderate party?
I think there is going to be a very profound debate in the Labour Party in the country. Some people on the right have been talking, even before defeat became inevitable, about the need for them to seize control of the machine in the country and the Transport House again. Now, whether they will succeed in doing that or not, I don't know, but the moderates are going to make a big fight, and I assume that that fight will begin within the parliamentary party.
Do you think there may be a return to the proscription, that is to say, the banning of certain extremists, such as Trotskyites, from holding office or candidature in the Labour Party, as used to be the case several years ago?
Well, people on the left will be reluctant to do that, but nevertheless, I think something will need to be done about them.
David Dimbleby.
Well, Robin Day, thank you very much.
I only say David Dimbleby because there's another David up there.
You're quite right. We tried very early on to call each other Dimbleby and Butler, and we've never quite got round to doing it.
You look so alike.
We will increasingly as the years go by. We've had 571 declarations. We've got 64 to come. Mrs. Thatcher is standing at 298 now. Let's just see the state of the parties then. And this is the prediction of the outcome, giving a 43 overall majority of Conservatives. And that will look something like this. If you imagine the benches on one side of the House of Commons in red, the wrong way around if you were the Speaker standing at the end, and the Conservatives in blue, just over that 318. But Labour well behind. They'll have a big majority over Labour. And of course they'll have some people voting regularly with them from the other parties.
64 results to come. She only needs 20 to get a clear majority. We think she's going to get 40 of those 60 seats that are to come, and about 9 of them are in fact from Northern Ireland. There are relatively few Labour seats to come, 1 or 2 from mining seats, and we're still waiting for Shirley Williams' result from Harford and Stevenage, and we're waiting for a result from Brecon and Radnor, which is the one really rather probable Conservative gain from Labour that is still in the pipeline. One Liberal hope still remaining, apart from Joe Grimond holding Orkney and Shetland, would be Skipton, where there's only a 1.4% Conservative majority last time. Whether Mrs. Graham can win that for the Liberals is the only remaining question, I think, in the seats in England that we're waiting for. Oh, Blythe, I'm sorry, there is Blythe. There's a fascinating situation in Blythe where Eddie Milne is challenging to get back his old seat as an independent Labour member.
We've got a recount in Belfast East. Eldon Griffiths has held his seat in Bury St Edmunds. We can see that figure in a moment. Well, they seem rather keen to show a film about Mrs. Thatcher, which I think we showed earlier on this morning. But I suppose for people who've only just joined us, I've no idea what's in it now. I can't even remember. I think it was what you did in your wrong shirt, Angela.
That's right. Yes,
That's
it
right.
was.
Well, now you will see Angela Rippon once again in an immediate, rapid change into different dress. Here she is.
The first 18 years of my life, I lived over the shop which my father owned and ran. That the job you do is fundamental to the future of Britain. Britain is not a place merely for big, large companies. It is a place where many private people have in the past and should in the future be able to show and develop their own initiative on behalf of the people.
Margaret Thatcher winning the hearts of shopkeepers with the story of her life. She was born Margaret Hilda Roberts on the 13th of October 1925 in the upstairs flat of Roberts the Grocers in Grantham, Lincolnshire. She and her sister Muriel were given a very strict upbringing. Her father, a staunch Methodist, was also a local politician and magistrate, and his family were expected to maintain high standards at all times. At the age of 10, Margaret Roberts won a scholarship to grammar school. There she was top of the form almost every year, captain of games and head girl for a fortnight. She went up to Somerville College, Oxford at the end of the war, and there she studied chemistry and X-ray crystallography, sang in the Bach choir and joined the University Conservative Association. In 1950, she translated student politics into the harsh reality of an election campaign in Dartford, Kent. Well, there was no doubt that it was a solid Labour seat, but in both 1950 and 1951, Margaret Roberts fought the sort of campaign that was later to bring her success. Dubbed as the prettiest candidate in Britain, she identified the outstanding issue of the day as the prices that housewives were paying in the shops, a battle cry that she's made her own ever since. During the '51 campaign, she'd married a fellow member of the Conservative Association, Major Dennis Thatcher, and 2 years later she gave birth to twins, Mark and Carol. Away from the world of politics, she now devoted her time to a successful career as a barrister specializing in taxation. But the pull of politics proved too strong, and in 1959 she was elected Conservative member for Finchley, a seat that she's held ever since. She was quickly spotted as a rising Conservative star, and in 1970, under the leadership of Edward Heath, she became Secretary of State for Education and Science. To date, that has been her only ministerial experience. But in 1975, after the collapse of the Heath government, and with the Conservatives in opposition, Margaret Thatcher's moment came. After 2 ballots among Conservative MPs, she became the first ever woman leader of her party. A position of an historical significance she readily explained to fellow Conservative Marcus Fox.
To follow Churchill, Macmillan, Alec Douglas-Hume and Ted Heath, well, it is a tremendous responsibility, and naturally I wish to do my best, and again to be the first woman at it is quite a responsibility. But after all, you know, the men haven't made such a success of it all the time. So, to yesterday's men, tomorrow's woman says hello.
The Conservatives have, as Angela was talking about, Mrs. Thatcher, have reached 300. Conservatives at 300, 18 to go. And it's coming up to 2 o'clock, and Mr. Callaghan is expected to go to the palace at 2:30. So we'll be seeing him do that at the time. Now, David, you've got some results we've had from local elections which have been interesting because of the contrast they show with the national pattern. You even had, I think, the Liberals losing control of a council.
Yes, well, the Liberals lost control of Ada in West Sussex, which is the only Liberal-held council in England with a full Liberal control. They have the comfort that they are still not the largest party, but they still are the second party in Liverpool, and which is still in this indeterminate position it's been in for some years. There is one very interesting result in Liverpool. In Liverpool-Wavertree, the Liberals got 15% of the vote for the parliamentary election. They got nearly 30% of the vote for local government. And this does stress the dilemma of the Liberals, which in David Alton did apparently succeed in Edge Hill in having his local government and his national vote work together. But elsewhere, even in the places where the Liberals have done very well, for example in London, Richmond, where the Liberals got a majority of the votes last year in the local elections, but Alan Watson couldn't keep that majority on the larger turnout of a general election.
There's one other aspect to this election we haven't talked about at all, which we certainly should. And that is that it's one of the first elections in which the immigrant vote in some constituencies has been sufficient, it was thought, to tip the balance between Conservative and Labour, with the bulk of immigrants, it was said, though the Tories always say this is not so, the bulk of immigrants voting for Labour. Now, what have you found, looking at the results, in those key places like Southall, Leicester South, the other places where there was a big...
The really striking thing, I think, is that the big cities of England, Bradford and Leicester, are the only two which have a swing under 1%. They only have 0.9% in each of those. Those are the two places with the largest Asian communities. And in Southall, the swing against to the Conservatives was only 0.3%. Now, this is in London, which had the highest swing of any region in the country. But in Southall, where he had all this trouble, the one really big, alarming, disturbing incident in the middle of the election, there was only a 0.3%, an absolutely negligible swing to the Conservatives.
And do you believe the argument that was being put by the LSE professor that the Conservatives have been picking up National Front votes in this election because of their tough stand on racial policies? Because if you actually look at the racial policies put forward by the Conservative government with the register and that, it's the attitudes that seem, the expression of the view that seems tough rather than any immediate change in the policy.
Well, there weren't all that many National Front votes to pick up. The National Front did in fact do very badly. The National Front was hitherto thought probably to take more votes from the Labour side and the Conservative side. I have no evidence to contradict Mr. Husband's one or to confirm it in front of me.
But the National Front's in a curious position, isn't it? Because if I remember your analysis correctly, when Liberals stood in October 1974 in constituencies where they hadn't stood in February 1974, the National Front vote was halved, suggesting that half the people who voted for the National Front then switched to voting for the Liberal Party. Well, anybody who knows the National Front on the one hand and the Liberal Party on the other would think that meant that voters were demented who did that. Well, why did they do that?
I think there are always a number of people who want to have some kind of cop-out from voting the two big parties. They don't like either of them, and they'll vote for a third party, in a sense, whatever it is, as a way of escape from the two big parties.
Well, now, I think, Professor, you've got the Scottish National Party to talk about. Do you want to do that now?
I would like to, yes.
Excellent.
I'd like to recall a moment last spring that now becomes quite fascinating. Remember, after the devolution debate and vote, Mr. Callaghan wanted a round of talks, which might have stretched over a month, to decide what next move to make. Now, the Liberals said no, they agreed to talks, but they wanted an immediate confidence vote, and so did the SNP want an immediate confidence vote. And Mr. Callaghan uttered an immortal phrase. He said, "This is the first time the turkeys have voted for an early Christmas." Here's what happened to the turkeys in the case of the SNP. They've held 2 seats, lost to Labour, Conservatives, right across the board. They forced an election by not standing back and giving Mr. Callaghan a chance to negotiate, and he might have carried on into June or even conceivably into September. They were insistent upon an early opportunity to show their displeasure with his failure to ram through and proceed with the devolution program. Now, did you hear Margot MacDonald saying in an earlier interview, we have one advantage because the only option now is independence. In other words, there's a curious sense in which, with the Conservatives committed not to proceed with devolution in any significant way, they're hoping the next time round the SNP can say, well, we tried it, it won't work, now our option of a fully independent Scotland is the only hope. Well, you say they're knocked down to 2 MPs, there's nothing in it. But these movements are not just in this country. They're in Quebec, they're in all parts of Europe, there are movements of devolution or separatism going on. So I wouldn't myself say that you can just assume that separatism is a dead duck. The next time there's major economic trouble in this country, it could come within a year or two, there might be a swing back. This time, the SNP will argue for the case for a fully independent Scotland. So I think that's the most interesting point about what's happened to the SNP. Back now to David.
Well, in our Belfast studio, he's just come in hot with his news script in his hand, Billy Flax, the political correspondent in Belfast. Now, Billy, we've been doing our best to interpret what's been going on, and I'm sure you will strongly disapprove of everything we've said, so perhaps you should have your say.
Well, so far as Northern Ireland goes, the most sensational result so far here has been in North Belfast, where the Reverend Ian Paisley's Democratic Unionist Party has gained the seat from the official Unionists by a majority of just under 1,000. The new MP is a former Stormont MP, John McQuaid. This is the seat which was held by the outgoing official Unionist MP, John Carson, who didn't stand again for health reasons. He supported the government in the last crucial confidence vote. This result is clearly a blow to the official Unionists who had hoped to retain their 7-member strength in the new Parliament. And the result is clearly due to a 3-way split in the Unionist vote in North Belfast. Then in West Belfast, SDLP leader Gerry Fitt has retained the seat he has held since the mid-1960s, with the majority increased by about 3,000. He was helped again here by a split Unionist vote. And we've just heard that a recount has been called in East Belfast, where the Alliance Party leader Oliver Napier is making a big bid to unseat the official Unionist William Craig, the former Stormont minister. But there are now serious doubts as to whether this alliance bid will in fact succeed in East Belfast, because the Alliance Party in the 3 results so far declared in Belfast hasn't been doing as well as it expected. And another party which had high hopes in this election, Republican clubs, has also not fared very well so far. This is Billy Flax in Belfast, returning you to London.
Just before you go, what do you attribute this success of Ian Paisley to? I mean, what are the policy differences or the emotional differences between the official Unionist Party on the one hand and the Democratic Unionist Party of Ian Paisley on the other?
Well, there is a rather sharper policy, I think one could say, for the Democratic Unionists, and particularly on the security front. They've been sharpening up their security policy very much in this election, quite clearly appealing to grassroots loyalists on this score. There are some minor differences in terms of policy in relation to devolved government in Northern Ireland. I think Ian Paisley is really in favour of getting an early referendum as the decisive thing in terms of getting a devolved government back at Stormont. But they're rather marginal things in terms of general policy. It's just I think that the Democratic Unionist Party does tend to run a much more militant policy, and of course it has been attacking the official Unionist Party very considerably in this election. It's been adopting the slogan, "This is the Unionist Party you can trust." It has been implying that official Unionists might at some time sell out. And there are obviously areas of Belfast, parts of North Belfast as is shown, where this policy does have quite a strong appeal.
Well, thanks very much. We'll come back to you again in a moment. But in the meantime, Robin?
I have with me in another part of London, that is, Dr. Gareth Fitzgerald, the leader of the opposition in the Republic of Ireland. Dr. Fitzgerald, let me ask you this first of all, because I think it's the fundamental question to put to you. What would you like to see taken by way of a new initiative towards peace in Northern Ireland, taken by Mrs. Thatcher and her new Secretary of State?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I think one of the things that we had hoped was that there would be a clear-cut result and a majority for one or other party, which would therefore have the power to take such an initiative without having to worry about its House of Commons position.
And depending on the Ulster Unionists, you mean?
Yes.
Yes.
We were glad that there is a clear-cut result. The kind of initiative we would hope for would be one which would endeavour to recreate in Northern Ireland devolved government with the participation and support of both sections of the community. Now, I know that this has failed in the past on several occasions, and many people become discouraged as a result of that. But I think it is worth trying again, and an energetic, imaginative and able Secretary of State for Northern Ireland with the clear backing of the Cabinet and a powerful position in Cabinet, and with bipartisanship in the House of Commons, could, I think, help to pull Northern Ireland out of the political doldrums that it's got into.
Are you encouraged by the recollection that it was a Conservative government which did in fact institute a system of locally elected devolved power-sharing government which fell down in the beginning of '74?
Yes, the fact is that was the most successful initiative. It failed in the end, but it was the best thought out initiative, and the one that came nearest to succeeding in resolving the Northern Ireland problem. And it was one into which a huge effort was put by the Prime Minister at the time, Ted Heath, and by his Secretary of State, Mr. Whitelaw. And it's only if, in fact, the full attention of the British government is focused on the problem that it's likely that you can get a solution. But I think there's more goodwill towards the solution than perhaps people think, because the domestic politicians, as distinct from those at Westminster, including many unionists, I believe, are a bit fed up with being left out in the cold, and they'd like to be helped towards finding a resolution of the problem, which some may feel they've created for themselves, but which the hook on which they're stuck to get off that hook.
Dr. Fitzgerald, I have with me, as it happens, John Cole, the deputy editor of The Observer, who is, as you know, an Ulsterman, and I know that he has a question he wishes to put to you on this matter. John?
Dr. Fitzgerald, while agreeing with you on the subject of power sharing as the most hopeful way forward, I'm sure you would agree with me that one of the great obstacles in its way is the continuance of violence. Now, supposing Mrs. Thatcher's government and her Secretary of State come back to your government on the most grievous subject that affects the two countries, that is, murders committed near the Irish border on the northern side of policemen and soldiers, of which there have been a distressing number in recent months, and asks again for you to reconsider the position on extradition. Do you think there's any chance that this will happen? Because the other system of joint courts simply isn't working.
Dr. Fitzgerald?
Yeah, the question of extradition is a red herring. The system of joint courts hasn't worked because of the refusal of the British security authorities to furnish evidence in any single case against any person in the Republic suspected of a crime in Northern Ireland. We have sought repeatedly such evidence. We would not be surprised to find that there are some people in the Republic who've come from Northern Ireland and against whom there is evidence. There are enough bank robberies by Northerners being carried on and post office robberies to make that quite likely. But we have failed to get such evidence, and what we hope now is that this government will cooperate with us in dealing with this, because it does not suit us to have such people at large in the Republic. It does not suit us to have such people in a position to go back to Northern Ireland and to engage in violence there.
John Cole, would you like to respond to the point that your suggestion was a red herring?
Yes, I mean, without attributing blame to one government or the other as to why this system hasn't worked since Sunningdale, it has not worked. And this is one of the great grievances between the two countries. Why will you not reconsider, or will Mr. Lynch not reconsider extradition?
Well, because, first of all, extradition is constitutionally impossible for us because of the incorporation in our constitution of international law.
How do other countries subscribe to
Other countries do not have the same constitutional difficulty, except to a degree France, which has reservations in regard to this convention also.
Why don't you alter your constitution?
Well, wouldn't it be easier if the security authorities would give us the evidence in which they want people to prosecute than to ask us to alter our constitution? Extradition does hold problems. The Bennett report on the treatment of prisoners in Northern Ireland and the reaction, some of the reactions to it would explain why there could be reluctance to involve oneself in extradition proceedings. But what I'm really concerned about is we have a law, we want to make it work. Either there are people in the Republic against whom there's evidence or there aren't. If there are, why is it that in the 2 3/4 years since the Act was introduced, we've never been given the evidence? I've checked with our Director of Public Prosecution's office in the last 48 hours. There is no case in which evidence is given. There has, I believe, been one conviction because a man arrested for an offence in the Republic confessed to an offence in Northern Ireland. We cannot get the evidence, and we can only, in the circumstances, presume that either there are no such people in the Republic, which seems improbable, or there's a deliberate refusal to give us the evidence in order to keep this extradition kite flying.
May I
hope the new Tory government...
Dr. Fitzgerald,
Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I don't want to have to rush off somewhere else because of some other development. I would like to get this in. May I put the point again, but in a different way? Do you, as a political realist, expect Mrs. Thatcher and her new Secretary of State to be flexible with regard to a new political initiative in Northern Ireland while murders of this kind go on and shock the British people?
I think that if Mrs. Thatcher were to decide that no political initiative would be taken until violence ended, she'd be playing into the hands of the IRA and doing precisely what they want.
That's not the point I put to you.
I think it is the point you put to me.
Not
and
quite.
I think that a political initiative is needed, that violence will not end until the political initiative succeeds, until there is a government, a devolved self-government in Northern Ireland involving both parties, both sections of the community, which could then provide the moral basis and the political basis for dealing adequately with the problem of violence.
But don't you think that there would be more likely of a successful, there would be more likely to have a new and promising initiative from a new Conservative government if Mrs. Thatcher were able to do so, because murders of this kind were beginning to subside instead of increase?
I think so. That's precisely why I suspect the IRA will endeavour to keep violence going in order to discourage such an initiative, and I'm sure that Mrs. Thatcher will not fall into the trap of playing the IRA's game.
Why are you so adamant about refusing to consider, or all parties in Ireland refusing to consider, altering your constitution so you can have a proper and effective law against the extradition, or the extradition of murderers and assassinators?
Our constitution can only be altered by a complex process involving a referendum, because extradition to Northern Ireland would involve handing people over to for interrogation by a particular group of people who have been stated, in respect of whom it has been stated in the Bennett report, that prisoners have suffered violence that was not self-inflicted while in their custody, and because we have an effective mechanism in which we could try, convict and lock up such people if in any single instance evidence would be given to us, and because we don't like to use this tactics by the British government not giving us that evidence and using this propaganda against us.
Surely, Dr. Fitzgerald, you've given the answer to the question yourself. If you're not prepared to trust the RUC to interrogate these people, your courts would not be prepared to trust them to give evidence. Therefore, it's quite understandable that the British authorities are not attempting to take cases through your courts.
I'm sorry, that does not follow at all. There's no question of that. We have made provision, in fact, that evidence can be taken in Northern Ireland itself from witnesses who don't even need to come to the Republic. And that is there. That act was passed in good faith by us in collaboration with the British government, and the refusal to operate it has given the IRA a free rein to a degree in a way which we find intolerable and which is causing considerable distress and difficulties with us because of violence in the Republic. Remember, the problem we have is of violence in the Republic and bank robberies carried out by people who come from Northern Ireland. There isn't even a handful of people in the Republic who've ever been convicted of any such crimes in Northern Ireland. It's a one-way process. And
Thank you, Dr. Fitzgerald. I do apologise. I don't wish to be discourteous, but I have to move.
Right. Very much indeed.
Well, we move to go to the boot of the Prime Minister's car, I think, being packed outside number 10 Downing Street, ready for him to go to the Queen and then on down to the country for the weekend. But Michael Cocker is there and he will have the authentic details. Michael?
Well, that's right, David. I seem to have spent most of the 24 hours saying, the last 24 hours, saying the Prime Minister is expected any minute now. I think I may be right this time. Mr. Callaghan, as you know, likes playing cat and mouse with the press. Indeed, in fact, if he hadn't enjoyed it so much in October and had gone for an October election, it may even have been that he would have won. But this is probably his last ever cat and mouse game for the press that he will play as Prime Minister, because he's expected, literally, within the next couple of minutes, to come out of this door, to go to the palace, tender his resignation to the Queen, and then I understand he will be driving down not to Chequers, but to his farm in Sussex for a quiet weekend. We're expecting him out any moment.
I think we'll come back to you, because I think we have a count going on at Skipton, which is a seat that Claire Brooks, the Liberal, was hoping she might be able to take. She'd have to get 590 votes to overturn the Tory there. And I think it's Tim Hewitt who's sitting on the balcony.
Well, we're expecting a declaration around about 2:30, but it's very close. There could be a recount. I spoke to both the people who are in contention, Claire Brooks and John Watson, the Conservative, a little earlier, and neither of them were confident either way. We do know there's been a very high turnout here, around about 84%, which is about 2% up on what the turnout was in October 1974. The voting, though, has been a little patchy. Those in the rural areas seem less inclined to vote than the people living in the market towns of the Skipton constituency, Sedbergh, Settle and Skipton itself. We've got a crowd of about 1,000 here, all waiting expectantly, but as I say, we expect 2:30. There could be a recount. It could be very close. With that, back to London.
And my apologies to Khalid Aziz for calling him Tim Hewitt. Anyway, he seems safe enough up there on the balcony, and he's grinning, so he obviously doesn't mind. And if there's a recount there, well, we'll stick with it till we get it. Meantime, at Downing Street, everything is in activity for the moment.
We just had another admirer of Mrs. Thatcher coming and presenting blue flowers. He was a rather extraordinary man, because he had not only blue flowers, but a blue hands, blue gloves, and a blue face.
And a blue rinse?
No, he had a purple rinse, and he's just walked out of our shot. He didn't say what party he supported, but it seemed fairly obvious.
Well, all we can see is 3 policemen all in blue. I don't think that means anything significant.
Well, we've seen the suitcases being packed in the boot of the Prime Minister's Rover. You may be able to see that now, if we were lucky. They're rather poignant suitcases, because they have as baggage marks a little ticket, one of which says Vote Labour.
Well, we'll leave you and your poignant suitcases just for the moment, Michael, and go over to the Tory party headquarters and Richard Kershaw.
Well, people are playing things very, very politely and correctly here. It's been apparent for some time, obviously, that Mrs. Thatcher is going to be the next Prime Minister, but there's still the question of the formal victory. Mr. Callaghan still has to go to the palace. Then there will be a decent interval, and then Mrs. Thatcher, presumably, will be called to the palace. It'll be sometime after 3 at the earliest before this takes place. But there's a very different mood inside. Everybody is beginning to think of cabinet forming and this sort of thing. In contrast, certainly, the crowds around here, too. It's not only warmer, but there's a lot more people. Those of us who did the long night watch, the only exciting thing that happened was the arrival of the dust cart, which took away great bags of beer cans that had been drunk by the journalists who were here last night. Shortly afterwards, there arrived a van from a well-known wine merchant, I mustn't advertise it, bearing large crates of something which will consume later, which I imagine was champagne. There's a totally different atmosphere here, but everything is being played very correctly, and everybody is being very quiet.
Now, do you have any idea when government appointments might be announced, or the main ones?
That is not clear at all. The attitude being taken inside this building is that the victory has not yet come. that Mr. Callaghan has not yet gone to the palace and Mrs. Thatcher has not yet been called to form a government. But you can bet your bottom dollar that on that first floor quite a lot is being discussed, David.
Well, it's all very proper, isn't it?
Yes, indeed, sir.
305 Conservatives have at the moment.
I wouldn't think we'll hear anything more until well after 3. We won't see Mrs. Thatcher come out.
Good. Thanks very much, Richard. Well, there's a recount in Belfast East, and in one of these little hiati, let's have a look at the regional swing map. This is just to remind you how the swing went in various parts of the country, and David, you have a reservation or two about
how it got higher the further south you got. Some people have been suggesting that there's enormous variety. Well, if you leave out Scotland, which did behave quite differently, where the net movement was slightly to the Labour Party through the collapse of the Scottish national vote, right across the different regions of England, and not only these big regions, but the sub-regions of England, there is a fairly standard swing between just under 4% in the north to just under 7% in the southeast. And the variety of swings in the regions and the sub-areas or the different categories you look at, agricultural seats, working class seats, seaside resort seats, all of these are in this sort of general central area. But this doesn't alter the fact that there have been some sensational exceptions. In Ipswich, where there was actually a swing to the Labour Party holding on in that marginal seat, and in Dagenham and Barking in the area around the Ford factory, where there was a 14% swing to the Conservatives. Or in Birmingham, Northfield and Bromsgrove, around the Longbridge factory, where there was a 10% swing to the Conservatives, in contrast to the British Leyland area of Oxford, where there was only a 2% swing, though that was enough to turn the Oxford seat over to the Conservatives again.
Good. Well, I'd like to see the professor on his feet, but he doesn't look as if he's going to get on his feet. No, not just yet, they say. Not just yet. National vote instead. Here we have the national vote, then. And this isn't complete yet of these percentages. 44% for the Conservatives, 38% Labour, 14% Liberal. That's high, you see, 14% for the Liberals. That's better than at the beginning of the campaign. It was thought they'd only get about 8%, and they're right up at 14%, and that's better than they've done in any year except 1974 elections since the war.
And here you see the change. The Conservatives up 8%, Labour down 2%, actually making a sort of net swing of about 5%, just under 5%, Liberals down 5%. Now, on those overall figures, the Conservatives are probably going to get 44%, which is more than the winning party has had since 1970. So in 1974, both elections, only about 75% of the vote went to the two big parties. In this election, something like 82% has gone. Now, I think in the post-mortems, people are going to say this is the collapse of third-party votes. Well, I don't think it really is. We've got the presence, which we usedn't to have, 2 Scottish nationalists, 2 Welsh nationalists in the Parliament. You've got the Liberals in double figures with 10, probably with 11 seats, possibly even 12 if Skipton, where maybe a recount went the Liberals' way. You're going to have a rather different situation. But basically, you are going to have 82% of the vote. You're going to have something of a reversion to the old two-party situation, and of course you're going to have an absolutely clear majority, which we haven't had since before the election before last, before February 74.
It's looking very much as though the Liberal vote is going to go up to 4 million. It's standing at the moment at 3,906,000 on the popular vote, and psychologically 4 million would be good for the Liberals. It's a very respectable figure, and it's one they only exceeded since the war in those 2 elections in 1974, because in the election that Mr. Heath won in 1970, the Liberals were just over 2 million, so they're double the position they were when there was last a Conservative government.
And also, of course, the votes up